Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. This is a very long ink swatch video. I just randomly had the idea that I wanted to swatch my entire fountain pen ink collection, and this took 2 afternoons to do. And to keep this interesting, instead of just talking about the Googleable information about the ink and trying to describe the color, which you can very obviously see on the screen, I would tell you the stories behind each of the inks because I associate a lot of these inks and colors with specific memories and phases of my life, and I never want to forget those. And I don't know if other people have done this before, but I had the idea to cut up little strips of paper from common notebooks that I use. So the first one is the Hobonichi paper, second is the Leuchtturm paper, and third is a Rhodia notepad. I just used my X-Acto knife to cut up the strips and pasted it into this traveler's notebook insert. This way I can very easily swatch the ink on 4 papers and compare them on the same page. The way I organize these inks might not make sense outside of my brain, but I basically started with the first 2 inks that I purchased as a category, and then after that, every brand has its own category, and then within the brand, I swatch them based on the date I purchased them. So I literally went through my receipts from like 2017 to find the exact date and vendor from which I purchased the ink bottles. And you might be wondering, what will I do if I purchase further inks? That is a future me problem, so let's not talk about that. Okay, let's get started with the first ever ink that I purchased, which was the Waterman Intense Black. And I got this in September of 2017 from Amazon. And I purchased this alongside my very first fountain pen as well, which was the Pilot Metropolitan. And this might be a controversial opinion, but I am not the biggest fan of the Pilot Metropolitan. In fact, the first time I used the Metropolitan with this ink, I was just so put off by fountain pens that I gave it up for like the next several months because I was like, fountain pens are definitely not for me. I do know that a lot of people do enjoy the Pilot Metropolitan, so maybe I just got a defective one or something. But as for the ink, this is a really solid black ink. The only thing is it's not waterproof, so if you are looking for a waterproof black, I would look elsewhere. This second bottle is a J. Herbin ink, and it is this beautiful green. And this also happens to be my first ever Wonder Pens order, which is a Toronto fountain pen stationery company. And if you are familiar with my brand, you would know that nowadays Wonder Pens carries my products, and we have also collaborated on a set of washi tapes before. So it is just so crazy for me to think about how in 2018, I was in my senior year of high school and I was placing my first Wonder Pens order, not knowing what I was getting myself into. And fast forward to now, we have a very close relationship. So yeah, this ink is very special to me just because it's my first bottle from Wonder Pens. I also purchased my first ever TWSBI fountain pen with this bottle, which is my preferred starter fountain pen that I always recommend to other people. So I categorize those as my introduction to fountain pen inks. And then moving forward, I went a little bit crazy with my ink purchases. The first brand section is Diamine or Diamine, I never know how to say it. This brand is very reliable and relatively affordable, especially if you purchase from European retailers. And it's a great way to build your color collection. So the first one that I got is Earl Grey from Goulet Pens. I purchased this because I went through a gray phase in high school. Like my entire wardrobe was gray. I drank Earl Grey tea just because it had grey in the title. Also, it's delicious, but I picked it up because it had grey in the title. And I was also obsessed with the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. So yeah, I just had this huge phase with the color gray, and so that's why I purchased this ink, and it actually is still one of my favorite inks to this day. It has a pretty pinkish red sheen on the right paper. The second Diamine ink that I purchased was Steel Blue, and this is like an in-between of blue and green, like a turquoise. And I do remember being a bit disappointed because, at least for me, this leaned a bit too green rather than blue. But eventually I did grow to love it, and I used this a lot for my calculus homework. And I remember I paired this with my Lamy All-Star Pacific Blue fountain pen, which I think I sold it a year ago. So I no longer have the pen, but I did keep this ink. Next, we have Autumn Oak, and as you can see, the bottle looks a bit different. I believe this is just like Diamine's older packaging, and I was so confused when I first got it because I was like, this doesn't look like Earl Grey or the Steel Blue bottle. But yeah, anyways, around this time I started researching more about the different ink properties, and I really wanted to get an ink that displayed the shading property well. So I went on the Reddit forum, as one does, and a lot of people said that Autumn Oak was a really good shading ink. So that's the only reason why I purchased it, and it is one of my more unique inks. I really do love it, and it shades really, really well. And by the way, shading is a property where basically the ink pools a bit and there's a greater contrast between the lighter parts of the line and the darker parts of the line, if that makes any sense. Okay, moving on. The next ink that I have is Majestic Blue, and this is very appropriately named because it is certainly a very majestic navy blue. And again, I was really into different properties at this point, and people on Reddit said that this was a great sheener. And sheening is basically like, not really glitter, but it's kind of like a pearlescent look, especially when it catches the light. And this navy blue ink sheens red. So under like sunlight or just like certain lighting, there are parts of it that's like a pearlescent red, and it's super, super pretty. The only thing is this ink literally never dries. I am someone who keeps all of my homework and notes from all the way back in high school. I still have my old calculus notebook where I used this ink a lot. And even now, if I rub my fingers across the pages, this ink will smear after like, I don't know how many years it has been since high school. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend this for important documents. But if you want a very pretty shimmery ink, I would definitely recommend this one. Next is Oxblood, which is one of my dearest ink bottles. I first got a sample of this from Wonder Pens, and I loved it so much that I bought the full bottle. I have two memories associated with this ink. The first memory is I wrote a 4-page essay using this Oxblood ink and a fountain pen, of course, and I wrote it in cursive. I was super, super proud of it. I thought it was like super epic. Unfortunately, the next day, my English teacher handed back the essay and she said, "Helen, this is beautiful writing, but I cannot read your handwriting, so please type it out." So yeah, I had to type it out in the end anyways. And the second memory that I have is kind of funny. So you know how like when you clean your pens or you ink up your pens, your fingers tend to get dirty and stained, just like inevitably. I took a photo of my ink-stained hands with Oxblood, and I sent it to the guy that I liked at the time, and I joked about murdering somebody. So that was my way of flirting back in high school. In seriousness, I really do love this ink. I think it's a really nice deep brownish red. And then my last Diamine ink that I have is Terracotta. This is part of their 150th anniversary collection. There are several other wedges, and if you piece it together, I believe it forms a circle, which is super cool. I purchased this ink, I believe because, as I showed previously, I had Autumn Oak. However, my eyesight isn't very good, so just because Autumn Oak is rather light, I was having a hard time reading my writing, so I wanted something that's like a shade darker, and Terracotta was exactly that. So it looks like 2020 was my last Diamine purchase, and it's just because I kind of moved on to more interesting inks. But honestly, I have been thinking about picking up a few more on my wish list, just because, again, Diamine inks, they have never failed me. The next brand is, I believe, pronounced 괚ᴜᴜᴜ. It's a German brand, and I have 2 bottles from them. The first one is Scabiosa. This is my one and only Iron Gall ink. I don't know too much about Iron Gall inks. I just know that you have to be careful with it for certain pens because something to do with it reacting with the ink sac. I don't know. Oh my gosh. I just know there is some disclaimer to be had with Iron Gall inks. My only note is that despite this being a really, really pretty and unique muted plummy purple color, which I absolutely love, it smells really, really bad, just like a very chemically smell. And I'm sure it has to do with the Iron Gall property of it. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, especially if you are sensitive to smells. And then the second bottle is, oh gosh, I think it's like 괚ᴜᴜᴜ. I'm not too sure. Again, it's a German name. I am terrible at pronouncing. And this color is also special to me because I purchased this alongside my very first gold nib pen, which was the Pilot E95S. And I inked it up together, and it was just a magical experience. And it is still one of my favorite colors to this day. Next up, I have my Noodler's inks, or ink, I guess. I have this one bottle that I bought from 2018. This is Lexington Gray, and later you will also see that I make a placeholder for Noodler's Black, which I eventually gave away at some point, so I no longer have the ink. As I talked about earlier, I went through a gray phase in high school, so that is why I purchased this color. It is a nice gray, however, as I noted in the swatch, it is very wet and it feathers a lot, so it's a color that I don't ever really reach for. I also didn't have the best experience with the black ink bottle, so I did give it away to a friend who also uses fountain pens, and yeah, I don't know if they like it better, but that is all for Noodlers. Moving on to the Sailor section, which is a very big section because Sailor is one of my absolute favorite brands. They have so many different product ranges and their color selection is insane. So the first one is Studio 350. I got this as a match for my Pilot Decimo, the purple one, and if you have been watching my videos for a few years now, you might remember that pen. It was one of my favorites, and I did sell it off. Yeah, I went through my fountain pens and sold off a few of them just because I wanted to justify getting, I think, my Pelican fountain pen. I just simply didn't need so many different pens, so I thought it could use a better home. But yeah, anyways, that pen and this ink was just my perfect duo. The next one is also part of the Studio line. This one is Studio 123, and this was a very hyped up ink, and for good reason, because it is one of my most unique inks. There are bits of, well, as you look at it, it's like a grayish purple, but there are also bits of like mint and blue, just like depending on the type of paper that you use it on. I feel like this ink is just so magical and whimsical and dreamlike, and I love it so much. Sailor inks in general do smell noticeably more than my other fountain pen inks, so I do want to make a note of that, but it's not as bad as like the Iron Gall ink that I was talking about, to the point where I can't use it. The next one is part of the Shikiori line, which I have several inks from this line. And this color is Yoraki, which is a, I would say, mid to dark red. Definitely not a super bright red. And this ink is super special because I purchased it in store at Wonder Pens. I had been living in Toronto for 2 years maybe at that point, and I just never got around to visiting the actual Wonder Pens store. I often talk about how I have a friend in Toronto. Her name is also Helen, and we decided to make a trip to the Wonder Pens store, and it was just such an amazing experience. I think I actually even vlogged it. It's somewhere on my channel. Then I have the Sailor Manyo ink. I really like the Manyo line. It's super pretty. And this one is Konagi. Many of you might know that probably my favorite ink is Pilot Iroshizuku Konpeki, which I will be swatching later. That one is very similar to this Konagi ink. They're both like super bright blues, like just like a true blue. What an excellent description. But I often do choose to use the Konpeki ink just because, again, the Sailor inks do smell a little bit more. So if given the choice between two very similar inks and one smells and one doesn't, I just tend to go for the one that doesn't smell. But yeah, this one is a super beautiful blue, and I use this a lot for mathematics. The next ink is also part of the Shikiori line, and this one is called Shimoyo. This one looks black on camera, but it is a very dark navy. And this is super special because when I visited the Take Note pen store in Toronto, that is when I purchased my first and only Sailor Pro Gear fountain pen. And I guess I just had a nice conversation with the store owner, and she let me pick a free ink bottle, like any of them. And I thought that was just such a nice thing. So this is the ink that I picked. So I guess this actually kicks off all of the gifts that I have received. I have been so blessed. So again, this first one is by the lovely shop owner. And then the next page has all of my gifts from my friends in Japan, as well as a gift from my friend Helen in Toronto. So my friend Rena, she's again in Japan, she gifted me a bunch of Urameku inks. And then also my friend Jean in Japan, she gifted me a few bottles of the Urameku inks as well. So I just have a bunch of inks from this line. And the Urameku line is super special because it is like a dual shading ink, I believe. So basically, depending on the paper, how long ago you wrote with it, stuff like that, just like a bunch of different factors, the ink changes color. It is so cool. These swatches do not do these inks any justice. The camera is having a hard time picking up the different colors, and I feel like they all look pretty close to black, but I promise in real life when you actually write with it, it looks very different. And just in general, you might notice that a lot of my color choices are darker colors and quote-unquote legible colors. And it's mostly because, again, my eyesight isn't very good, so I tend to go for darker colors. So these are perfect, especially if I don't want to use just a plain black. Most of these were Christmas gifts, and again, I'm just so grateful for all of my friends. While I was swatching these inks, I was also listening to Taylor Swift, and I found this treasure of a clip.
Deal with the broken heart. It's my birthday every day.
You get bonus points if you can make out which song that is from, based on my terrible singing. I also want to mention that this glass dip pen was also a gift from Rena. She sent it over from Japan, and this is my favorite way of swatching inks. I used to like fully ink up my fountain pens to swatch new ink colors, and that took 1,020 years. The glass dip pen is so much easier to just use a bunch of different colors at once, although I'm still trying to get a hang of writing with it. So the first 5 Urameku inks are rather dark gemtone colors, and the next 2, which are Kanyu and Yoi, they are also from the Urameku line, but I believe they're from a different series. These ones were gifted to me by Jean, and these ones are a little bit lighter, so you can see the colors a little bit better as well. Last but not least, I have another Shikiori ink, and this one is from my good friend Helen. She sent over a care package from Toronto, and in it was this ink. This one is also a very dark navy. I would say compared to the Shimoyo ink from the previous page, this one is even darker, so I can definitely see a difference as I'm looking at it in person. So anyways, that wraps up all of my Sailor inks. Again, if you are looking for interesting inks and also reliable, well-behaved inks, Sailor is definitely the way to go. The next section features all of my Pilot Iroshizuku inks, which are very famous in the fountain pen community, and for good reason. These inks are just, they're perfect. Like, the colors are perfect. The formula is perfect. Everything about them is perfect. Also, the bottles are super pretty, so that's a bonus. The first one that I bought was Tsukiyo, and this was from 2017, so very early in my fountain pen journey. And to this day, this is probably one of my favorite inks. This reminds me of a denim blue, and my memory associated with this ink is, again, with the guy that I liked at the time. I gave him a sample of this ink at the library, and I don't know, I thought that was kind of sweet. The second Iroshizuku ink that I got is Yamaburo, and this one was from 2020, and I got it from Goulet Pens. I did a lot of game theory homework with this ink. I don't know why, when I look at it, I just think of game theory. And I remember very specifically, I was tackling a difficult, I think like traffic problem with this ink, and I finally figured it out. It's a bright purplish magenta, but it's definitely not like super jarring on the eyes. Next is Konpeki, and this is definitely hands down my #1 favorite ink. Outside of black, I use this ink the most, and I use it the most especially for math problems. And I purchased this ink because, again, the guy that I liked at the time, this was his favorite ink, and he recommended it to me, and I promise, like, independently, this became my favorite ink as well. This is one of the few inks in my collection that doesn't look super close to black, but it's also very legible. And I just have a lot of memories of using this ink while figuring out homework problems and problem sets. The next one is really funny. As you can see by the bottle, I did not properly close it. I don't know when this happened. I just remember one day I wanted to ink up one of my pens with this ink, and when I went to grab it, I saw the bottle was empty, and I was like, when in the world did I finish this ink? And then I noticed the misaligned cap, and I realized that literally the entirety of the ink just evaporated. I think maybe the water components of the ink evaporated, and then at the very bottom of the ink sits all of the pigment. So yeah, crazy. I still kept the bottle because I just thought it was too funny. And then my final ink bottle, I got this very recently. Actually, it was in my recent haul. This is Iroshizuku Cosmosu, and it is a bright pink. I just wanted something very cheery, and I didn't have anything else like this in my collection. It kind of reminds me of cherry blossom. I have already written with this ink quite a bit in my planners, and just never fails to make me happy. So that wraps up all of my Pilot Iroshizuku inks. And again, if you are just getting into fountain pens, I would highly recommend this line of inks. It is very reliable. Okay, moving on to the next section, I have some inks from Dominant Industry, and I believe this is a Korean brand. Okay, I just did a quick Google search. Dominant Industry was started in Paju, South Korea in 2021, so wow, that's very recent. And now it makes sense why I haven't heard of this brand until, I guess, 2022 when I first purchased it from Wonder Pens. The packaging is super unique. It's kind of like a bulb at the bottom. And the bottle also comes with like a little, whatchamacallit? Oh, right, little eyedropper, which is super handy, especially if you want to make samples for friends or stuff like that. So the first one that I have is Standard 105, and it is called Forest. This is a dark saturated green, and I use this a lot for my econometrics homework and notes. The next two comes as a pair. They're super unique. The first one is Ginger Chicken, and the second one is Tuna Gray. And this is very special because this was a gift from the lovely folks at Wonder Pens. They have two adorable cats. I love seeing their photos on Instagram and through their blog posts and email newsletters. And their names are Chicken and Tuna. And these colors coordinate with the fur color. And I guess Wonder Pens collaborated with Dominant Industry for these exclusive inks. And they asked if I wanted them, and of course I said yes. And I love these colors so much, independent of the fact that they're named after the most adorable cats, but just because it is related to chicken and tuna, I love it so much more. Then the final one is October Leaves, and this was a gift from, again, my friend Helen in Toronto. This is part of the pearlescent line, and I did shake it up just to see if I could get some of the shimmer, but I don't think I shook it up well enough, so it just looks yellow. But do know that it is supposed to be pearlescent, and Helen gifted this to me because I have been on the hunt for my perfect yellow, and it's very hard because, again, my eyesight isn't very good, so I need to ensure that the yellow isn't too bright or too light. But I'm also very fussy, and I don't want the yellow on the flip side to be like an ochre or like a gold. I just want the perfect in-between yellow. And I guess I was ranting to Helen about this, and she was so thoughtful and sent this to me. A few miscellaneous bottles. The first one is Lamy Obsidian, which I don't have because I actually ended up trashing it. It was a very nice black ink. However, I think my bottle was defective because every time I opened the bottle, it would just like explode everywhere and get these like specks of black ink puddles all over the counter every single time. And I had enough, and I just ended up trashing it. It was staining everything, and I am honestly a little bit traumatized by it. I, again, just think that I had a defective bottle, so that's the only reason. And the next one is Aurora Black, and I purchased this in store at Lay Wines. And this was a store near my Toronto apartment, and I only discovered it the last year that I was there, which is kind of crazy. This is another very solid black ink, and my friend and I used to joke that this ink is basically liquid gold. Then I have two inks from Troublemaker, and I believe this is a small business in the Philippines. They are known to make some really cool shading inks. So I got yellow tartanilla. I will say I really like this yellow. However, the formula is not my favorite, which is why I don't use it very often. It is very dry, and I just don't find it to be a pleasure to write with. But again, I really do love this shade. And the second one is 괬ᴜ. I'm not sure if I said it right. This is named after a Filipino street food, and I thought this was just such a fun shading ink. There's like bits of red and even orange. Unfortunately, again, similar to the yellow tartanilla, I find this ink to be really dry, so I have to just be very careful about which pens I use with it. Then I have two inks from DeAtramentis. You guys know DeAtramentis Document Black is my ride or die black. I have been using it every single day for the past year, basically. This is an archival ink, so it is waterproof and it doesn't fade over time. It's probably light fast, not too sure, but yeah, it's just a solid black, and I got this from Appel Boom alongside my Leonardo fountain pen, which you guys have seen me use consistently in the past year, and I don't know, I just struck gold. I got super lucky and happened to discover this combo that works so well with, I guess, with my tastes and the way I write, and I can't imagine looking for any other blacks. And the next one that I have is DeAtramentis Document Red. Now, for some reason, these swatches make the red look very faded and muted. I don't know why that is, because when I actually ink it up in my TWSBI, it is very vibrant and bright. So I'm going to insert a photo on the screen so you can see how it actually writes. I'm really confused why it looks so faded here, especially since I'm trying it on so many different papers, but I can promise, like, in real life it looks so much better. I'm definitely a huge fan of the DeAtramentis document inks. Okay, last but not least, we have Robert Oster, and the reason why I put Robert Oster at the end is because I do actively have a few bottles of Robert Oster inks that are on my wish list, and I have two incoming, so I thought I would leave it to the end so that I can just like swatch it. But for now, here is my collection, and I decided to draw an emoji, but I realized I don't know what Robert looks like, so yeah. The first one that I have is Blue Water Ice, and I got this in 2020 from Goulet Pens. I used this ink a lot for linear algebra. If you watched the entire video, you probably noticed that I own quite a few of these like similar bright blues, and it's because I guess I took a lot of math courses and I just really love doing math problems in blue, so I was just like dabbling with different shades of blue. So yeah, this is also one of my favorites, and it sheens a beautiful red on the right paper. The second Robert Oster ink that I have is called Chicago, and I got this from Colt Pens. I actually purchased two bottles at the time, one for me and one for my friend, and this is a very unique color. It is kind of like a swampy lake color. That doesn't sound very good, but you can see how beautiful it is. One of my lighter colors, so I don't reach for it too often, but just because it's named Chicago, there's like sentimental reasons that I keep this ink. And then with the same order from Colt Pens, I also got a second Robert Oster ink. This one is Black Violet, and exactly as it is titled, it is a very, very dark, almost black violet, and on the screen it probably just looks black. But yeah, in person you can see hints of violet. Again, I really like these sort of almost black colors just because it's easy on the eyes, but it's a little bit more interesting than using pure black. And then last but not least, we have Polar Vortex. This is a recent purchase and I got this in person when I visited Chicago. I visited Atlas Stationers and this is their exclusive collaboration. And I believe I featured it in one of my Chicago vlogs. A very pretty gray with hints of purple and blue. Okay, so that wraps up all of my swatches, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my fun stories behind them. I'm not too sure what fraction of my audience is interested in fountain pens, so definitely let me know if you're interested in more fountain pen related content. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!